Welcome to step 4 of ciabatta bread making. We're at the point that we're ready to shape the loaves from the dough. And whatever work surface works for you will be fine. I choose to use a pizza board. I just find that easier. But to secure it so it doesn't move around is you can just dampen a piece of a paper towel, place it underneath the board. This will work with any type of cutting board, and this way it doesn't move. So we have our last rising step, and you can see it probably went a little too long. It's quite big, and that's okay. Don't let that worry you. You just slowly lift the saran wrap from the dough and it will pull away. Sometimes you can pull in 2 different directions on the saran wrap, which will expedite the release of the dough from the saran wrap. And that's a good sign that you have very good quality of elasticity in your bread dough. Then what you're going to do is you're going to use a dry spatula and pull the dough away from the glass bowl. But before we do that, you do want to dust the surface that you're using with a little bit of bread flour. You'll be using this to help shape the dough, and then it will release from the actual breadboard a little bit easier. Now we're ready to remove the bread dough. So begin by separating the dough from the sides of the bowl. And again, it might appear that it's going to stick, but most of the dough will come away. Once you have it halfway released, then just use gravity to your advantage. Let the dough roll out of the bowl. Use the spatula to certainly assist the dough, and look, the bowl is almost clean. You're going to dust the dough with more bread flour, just a light dusting. Again, you'll use this to shape it because the dough is a bit moist. It could stick to your fingers, so having a little bit of bread flour, I might have said bread dough, bread flour will just make it easier to shape. So while we're waiting there, I'm going to get a very sharp knife, and you can cut the dough into as many loaves that you'd like. The original recipe suggested 2 loaves. Those are quite large because I freeze the dough after it has cooled. So I usually like to do 3 loaves, but if you like a few smaller loaves, you could easily get 4 loaves of bread from this one recipe. So to do 3, you just have to eyeball where you want to separate the dough into 3 pieces. And I'll be honest, I don't use any scientific approach, and the loaf sizes will vary, and that's just life. Now, it doesn't matter which piece you start with, but you're going to flour your hands a little bit, not too much, and you're going to begin shaping. So usually I take the piece and fold the ends inward and begin to roll the piece to help the edges, the free edges, adhere to each other. So you want to make sort of an oblong loaf. And once you're tucking in the edges, you can see it'll start to adhere to itself. Now, if you get an opening like this, that's an air bubble. There isn't anything wrong, but if you don't try to close it, it will actually create a big hole. So to close it, you just, again, punch it down and then reshape it to a certain degree. The other piece that's crucial in shaping the loaves, here's still a little bit more of a hole. So we'll just pinch it and it'll begin to adhere. The other is, as you're shaping, you're going to take the dough and with your hands sort of lightly manipulate the outer edge around to the side. That's to help prevent the loaf from actually, when it rises, that it doesn't have a outpouching to one side. Now that's easier said than done. If it happens, it's still quite edible. And sometimes it works better for me than others. But I can actually feel there's a little emptiness here in this loaf. I think it'll be fine. You don't want to manipulate too much. So this loaf, you can see the other side. This has too much of a break in it, so just by punching it down will help bring those edges together as it rises. So now it's ready. It looks a little bit better. Believe it or not, that will all adhere. If you're worried about it, just give it a little bit more of a help in forming together. And I tend to then stretch the dough a little bit. And we prepared our baking sheet, so we're going to move over and place this dough in any one of the areas for it to rise. We'll come back to that. Now we're going to shape the other two. Again, folding in the ends and then begin to roll it to secure the open edges. And again, you see some air pockets. I usually punch those down to try and minimize the big holes in the bread. Some people like that. It's actually decorative, but I like to have a little bit. I love an airy slice of bread, but not with too many big holes. If it feels sticky to you, you can use a little bit of the flour and just lightly brush your hand with flour over. Again, you want to pull the top sides down and over to try and secure the sides. Nice little loaf. We'll pull it a little bit. This is what the bottom looks like. Again, I don't worry too much about that because it'll rise and come together. And that knowledge comes with preparing the bread over and over again. Doesn't matter which slot. Doesn't matter if the parchment paper comes up a little bit, but you can see the wood actually creates sides. And the wood is heavy enough that the bread doesn't move or the board slices don't fall over. Again, our last is to bring the ends in and roll. And as you're rolling, you're actually using your fingers to help push it down and bring the pieces of the dough together. This one will be probably the largest loaf, which is okay. But it's a nice size loaf. You'll see that all of the loaves will double in size. Again, pulling and stretching, adding a little bit of flour to the top. Bottom, punch it so they come together. This is my favorite part of the dough. I love to work with dough. You can talk to it, make it feel at home. So this is the last piece. Now, this piece of parchment paper, you can either spread the board slice a little further apart for the dough to sink down, or you can bring up some of the parchment paper, either way. If you haven't cut enough parchment paper, it's okay if it comes up over the board and you'll just use something heavy to secure it. The board is strictly there during rising, so the bread will go straight up instead of to the side. Now we're going to cover it with a cloth and wait 60 minutes before we heat our oven. So that is step 4 of ciabatta bread making.